You are listening to the 90 Days Later podcast with Anna Charles, episode 190. Welcome to the 90 Days Later podcast, where we talk about what really happens when you take a break from drinking. And it turns out to be the best thing you've ever done. I'm Anna, coach to high achievers who are done waking up with regret and ready to feel in control around alcohol. If you've ever wondered what your life could look like with less wine and more you, you're in the right place. Hi all, and welcome back to the podcast. Today we are talking about the topic of the dopamine default. This is when wine is still your easy button. Now here's something I hear all the time, right? Even when I feel great, Anna, I still reach for that dopamine hit. And you know what? That makes perfect sense. Of course, your brain seeks dopamine. Of course, you want to feel good. This is how you are built. This is how humans are wired. This isn't about broken willpower or even about bad habits. It's about biology. Now, this episode is called The Dopamine Default, and it's all about what's really happening when wine still feels magnetic, even when there's nothing wrong in the situation you're in. All right, so let's start with this first. Your brain and mine, they are designed to chase dopamine. Dopamine is often called the feel-good chemical, but that's actually not quite right. It's not about pleasure itself. It's about pursuing pleasure. Dopamine is like your internal go-get-it system. It's what motivates you to solve problems, to chase rewards, and to stay curious about what's next. In other words, it's how you survived as a species, how humans survived, right? Why we are here today. So wanting a dopamine hit is not a sign of weakness. It just means your brain is working exactly as it was designed to. So let's look at this from a different lens. The problem is not dopamine. The problem is when wine becomes the default way to get that feel-good hit, right? To get that dopamine. How does this show up? You come home from a long day, you sit down to relax, and maybe your husband's next to you and dinner's done, and boom, right? The craving hits, even when you're not stressed, even when you're happy. This is your brain following a well-worn path to pleasure. Now, here's where it gets tricky. It gets tricky when your brain starts to expect that every dip in energy, every quiet moment, every flicker of boredom should be livened up. That's when wine stops being a choice and starts becoming a default. Bored during evening emails? Pour a glass. Not quite settled on holiday yet? Order wine before your suitcase is even unzipped. Not because you're unhappy, just because your brain is saying, hey, what's next? What are we doing? What do we normally do here? All right, over time, your dopamine receptors get overloaded or clogged up. I really like to think of them as being clogged up. You know how a filter gets on a vacuum cleaner when it won't pick up dust anymore. It's totally clogged. Neuroscientists call this dopamine downregulation, and it's really when your brain is flooded too often with dopamine from things like alcohol or other things like sugar or screens, right? Scrolling on a screen. It tries to protect itself by lowering sensitivity, which means that simple pleasures start to feel a bit flat, a bit meh, right? A cold drink of water on a hot day, right? That is glorious, but when it's not wine, I think, water, it's a bit boring, right? It's just sitting down and watching and on the evening, holding your husband's hand maybe. Lovely, but maybe it seems a bit, this doesn't quite hit the spot, right? Maybe a quiet moment on the balcony watching the sun go down. Lovely, but where's the wine to make this special, right? Those wonderful moments, they're still there. They're still available to you, but your brain just has a harder time recognizing them as rewarding. It's an easy way of thinking about it, right? I'm still getting that pleasure. My brain just doesn't quite understand how rewarding they are. So what happens is the contrast between just being and drinking gets bigger and bigger. And that's how wine starts to seem more exciting than it actually is, because newsflash, it is just liquid in a glass. But here's what happens when that contrast, when that gap between just being and drinking gets bigger and bigger. We start to feel positive feelings less as well, right? We stop feeling our positive feelings as much. Now, I want to say something here that I think a lot of people get wrong, or at least get confused about. I talk a lot about reducing desire, and people kind of get that, and they say, but listen, Anna, it's the dopamine. The dopamine's at play here. Kind of like we're fighting the dopamine. And they say it as if this is not just an explanation, but a reason to give in, right? It's a bit like saying my brain wants it, so I can't help it. It's just who I am. It's how I'm wired. Now listen, this is where we're using information that we have as an excuse. So I want to say, of course, it's the dopamine. Of course. But that is not a problem. This is information. You do not have to fight this, but you can learn to work with it. You can start noticing what your brain is actually asking for, not just what it's reaching for. Because sometimes the craving, the urge is not about alcohol at all, right? And you know this. You've probably seen this. It's about stimulation. It's about novelty. It's about escape. It's about reward. It's about relaxation. It's about connection. It's about forgetting pain. And when wine is your go-to, right, for a solution, catch-all solution for any of the above and more, your brain forgets how to find that somewhere else. So let's look at two moments where this often shows up. First, you've had a long day and you're finally home, you're on the couch and your husband's next to you and there's nothing wrong. Life is good. But there's that itch, that little whisper, a glass of wine would make this even better. That is the dopamine speaking. It's not because you're unhappy, but it's because your brain is expecting that hit. It's pure habit, purely coming from the dopamine. Second, here's the second way this often shows up. Consider you're on vacation. The sun is shining. You've checked out of work mode. Maybe you've even left your laptop behind. But instead of sinking into the moment and just really sinking in the glorious views and, the 2 weeks that's ahead of you at this wonderful place, you find yourself thinking, what time's dinner? Should we order wine with lunch? Is it too early for a cocktail? I am on holiday. Maybe I can have a cocktail by the pool. Now listen, it's not wrong to want pleasure. It's not wrong to desire this. But when wine is the main flavor of pleasure that you recognize and that you look for and that you seek to add, everything else is going to start to taste a bit muted, right? If you've been eating lots of meals when the garlic was the main ingredient, and then you had a meal without it, you think, oh my gosh, this is different. This doesn't taste quite as spicy. That's assuming you like garlic, of course. So listen, this isn't an episode about how to beat your brain or how to shame your desire. And it's not about making wine off limits or about demonizing pleasure. It's about waking up to the ways your brain has learned to expect quick hits of pleasure and what it might be missing out on, right? Because of that. We don't often think what we're missing out on because of that. We just think without that, we're going to miss out. So what do you miss out on because you go for the wine? When wine becomes your automatic dopamine fix, your experience of life narrows. It becomes harder to feel wonder, joy, delight, unless it's tied to a glass. I see this again and again. In fact, I see this on the reverse. I see this from when my clients come to me with whatever drinking pattern they're in. And the more we unwind that and the more we change that, I see space opening up. Their lives expand and they have all this space with which to feel pleasure or other things, other accomplishments, right? That before was kind of just signposted off, ring-fenced for alcohol. So your life becomes much more expansive, not narrow. But if you are still in that point where, you see wine as the main main source of pleasure that you get from life, and your experience of life is quite narrow. This is not your fault. I want to say that this is not because there's something fundamentally wrong or broken with you. It's your brain doing what it's trained to do. It's just trained to do this. But this is also your opportunity. Your opportunity to build a new default. Right? We can change that. We can move wine off of that spot we put on the pedestal and put something else there. This is our opportunity to build a new default, one that lets pleasure feel deeper, feel slower, feel more real, longer lasting. Okay, if wine still feels like your easy button, even when life is good, this episode has been your reminder that you are not craving alcohol. You are craving aliveness, and you don't have to chase it. You can learn how to feel it. That is the work we do inside coaching, right? By working together, not by cutting things out, but by waking things back up. Oh, it is such glorious fun to do this, right? Like I often say, the coaching, the work I do with clients it is not just about how many glasses of wine are you going to drink tonight and did you manage to do that. It is what your life becomes when we start to shift those beliefs and move into just a new way of seeing what you're capable of. If you want that help, and I want, I work with people who are ready. I'm ready to just do this, Anna. I'm scared. Every single one, I think, of my clients has been a bit nervous about this, but you just want to go for it. This can change your life. This will change your life. If you want that for yourself, go to 90dayslater.co and there is a button, book a call. You can book that, and that will get you a free hour with me where we'll sort of go over where you are, where you want to be. And I've also included the link in the show notes to this podcast episode. Other than that, I will see you next week. If this episode hit home and you're ready to explore what life could look like with alcohol in the backseat, let's talk. I work with people one-on-one who are ready to create the relationship with alcohol that works for them, so they feel powerful in their choices and at peace with their habits. Go to 90dayslater.co and click on book a call, or grab one of the free guides in the show notes to this episode. And if this podcast is helping you, a rating or review goes a long way to help others find this work too.